The elegant dining room of Meridian's was alive with the gentle symphony of fine dining, crystal glasses clinking against porcelain plate, the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation, and the barely audible notes of classical music floating through the warm, amber-lit atmosphere. It was Tuesday evening, and the restaurant was filled with Kansas City's elite, enjoying their usual refined experience. Harlan Whitmore stood behind the mahogany host stand, his eagle eyes scanning the room with the practiced precision of a man who had managed this establishment for 12 years. Every detail mattered at Meridian, from the perfectly pressed tablecloths to the precise spacing between wine glasses. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was an institution, and Harlan was its unwavering guardian. The heavy oak door opened with its familiar creak, and a man stepped inside, pausing momentarily to let his eyes adjust to the intimate lighting. He wore a simple navy jacket over dark jeans and white sneakers, clean but undeniably casual by Meridian's standard. No tie, no dress shoes, no reservation slip visible in his hand. Harlan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In his experience, men who walked into Meridian's dressed like they were heading to a sports bar usually meant trouble. They either didn't understand the establishment standard or simply didn't care about them. Either way, it was his job to maintain the atmosphere that Meridian's clientele expected and deserved. The man moved with quiet confidence through the entrance area, his gaze taking in the ornate chandeliers, the oil paintings lining the walls, and the meticulously arranged tables where Kansas City's most prominent citizens conducted their business over expertly prepared meals. Sloan Merrick, who had been refilling water glasses at table 12, noticed the newcomer immediately. Something about his posture, the way he carried himself, struck her as familiar, though she couldn't quite place where she might have seen him before. She watched as Harlan straightened his tie and began moving purposefully across the dining room floor. The conversation at nearby tables continued uninterrupted, but Sloan felt a strange tension building in the air. She had worked at Meridian's long enough to recognize when Harlan was about to have what he called a conversation about standards with someone who didn't meet them. Clifton Arledge, a distinguished gentleman in his 70s who had been dining at Meridian's every Tuesday for the past 8 years, glanced up from his salmon as the casually dressed man walked past his table. There was something about the stranger that caught his attention. Not his clothes, but his bearing. This wasn't someone who looked uncomfortable or out of place despite his attire. Harlan reached the center of the dining room and cleared his throat softly, the sound carrying just far enough to draw the attention of anyone within earshot. The moment had arrived, and several patrons instinctively paused their conversation, sensing that something was about to unfold. "Excuse me, sir," Harlan said, his voice carrying the perfect balance of politeness and authority that he had perfected over more than a decade of managing difficult situations. The casually dressed man turned slowly, and for just an instant, his eyes met Harlan's with a look that seemed to contain depths the manager couldn't quite read. It wasn't defiance, wasn't embarrassment, wasn't confusion. It was something else entirely. "I'm going to need to ask you to step outside with me for a moment," Harlan continued, his tone remaining steady and professional. The dining room fell into a hush so complete that the classical music suddenly seemed unnaturally loud. Even the kitchen staff, visible through the service window, had stopped their usual clatter and were watching the scene unfold. What happened next would transform an ordinary Tuesday evening into a story that would be retold throughout Kansas City for months to come. Harlan Whitmore had always prided himself on being able to read people the moment they walked through Meridian's door. In his 12 years as general manager, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to distinguish between those who belonged in the restaurant's refined atmosphere and those who would disrupt the carefully cultivated ambiance that made Meridian's the crown jewel of Kansas City's dining scene. The man standing before him now clearly fell into the latter category. Despite his calm demeanor and confident posture, his attire screamed casual disregard for the establishment's unwritten but universally understood dress code. Harlan had seen this type before. Wealthy individuals who thought their money gave them the right to ignore social conventions, athletes or entertainers who assumed their fame excused their lack of proper etiquette, or worse, people who simply didn't understand that Meridian's was not the kind of place where one showed up looking like they were about to grab a beer and watch the game. "Sir," "I think there may have been some confusion," Harlan began, his voice carrying the measured tone he had perfected for these delicate situations. "Meridians maintain certain standards of dress, and I'm afraid your current attire doesn't quite meet our requirements for the dining room." The man, who Harlan now noticed was younger than he had initially appeared, probably in his early 30s, listened without interruption, his expression remaining remarkably calm given the public nature of the correction he was receiving. Around them, the soft conversations that had momentarily paused began to resume, though several diners continued to glance their direction with poorly concealed curiosity. Sloane Merrick found herself frozen near the wine station, a crystal decanter still in her hand as she watched the interaction unfold. She had witnessed Harlan handle similar situations before, but something about this particular encounter felt different. The man being addressed wasn't showing any of the typical reactions she had come to expect. No indignation, no embarrassment, no immediate move toward the exit. Instead, he seemed to be studying Harlan with genuine interest, as if he were trying to understand something beyond the immediate confrontation. "I appreciate you letting me know about the dress code," the man replied, his voice carrying a slight Midwestern accent that sounded distinctly local. "I have to admit, I wasn't thinking about clothing when I decided to stop by tonight." Harlan nodded approvingly at what he interpreted as a reasonable response. Perhaps this would be easier than he had anticipated. "I completely understand, sir. These things happen. There are several excellent establishments nearby that might be more suited to your current style of dress. I'd be happy to recommend a few options that I think you'd find quite enjoyable." "That's very kind of you," the man said, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't planning to take the suggestion. "But I was really hoping to spend some time here specifically. I've heard such wonderful things about Meridians, and I was looking forward to experiencing it firsthand." Clifton Arledge, who had been pretending to focus on his meal while eavesdropping on the conversation, found himself increasingly intrigued by the stranger's response. In his 8 years of regular dining at Meridian, he had observed Harlan manage dozens of similar situations, and they typically resolved themselves within the first minute or two. Either the inappropriately dressed individual would apologize and leave, or they would become argumentative and require more forceful persuasion to depart. This man was doing neither, and his calm persistence was beginning to create an unusual dynamic. "Sir, I truly do appreciate your interest in dining," Harlan continued, his professionalism remaining intact despite a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested growing impatience. "However, our dress code isn't negotiable. It's one of the things that makes Meridians the special place it is. I'm sure you can understand that we need to maintain these standards for all of our guests." The man nodded thoughtfully, as if he were genuinely considering Harlan's explanation. "The dress code is important to you?" "It's important to the restaurant, yes," Harlan replied. "It's part of what creates the atmosphere that our clientele expects and deserves." "And how long have you been maintaining these standards here?" The question caught Harlan slightly off guard. Most people in this situation either argued about the policy or accepted it and left. They didn't usually engage in philosophical discussions about restaurant management. "I've been the general manager here for 12 years, sir. I've seen what happens when standards slip, and I can assure you that maintaining them is essential to Meridian's success." 12 years, the man repeated, seeming genuinely impressed. "That's a significant commitment. You must really care about this place." "I do," Harlan said, and for the first time, his rigid professionalism softened slightly. "Meridian's isn't just a restaurant to me, it's an institution. The people who dine here aren't just customers, they're part of a community that values excellence, tradition, and mutual respect." Sloane found herself nodding involuntarily at Harlan's words. She had worked at several restaurants before Meridian, and she had never encountered a manager who spoke about his establishment with such genuine passion. Whatever else might be said about Harlan's sometimes rigid adherence to protocol, no one could question his dedication to the restaurant. "I can hear how much this place means to you," the man said, and his sincerity seemed to resonate even with the nearby diners who were still listening. "That kind of dedication is rare." For a moment, the tension in the air seemed to ease. Harlan's posture relaxed slightly, and several of the observing patrons returned their attention to their meal, assuming the situation was resolving itself amicably. "Thank you for understanding," Harlan said, extending his hand in what appeared to be a gesture of mutual respect. I hope you'll consider returning when you're dressed more appropriate. I think you'd really enjoy the experience." But instead of shaking Harlan's hand or moving toward the exit, the man reached into the inner pocket of his navy jacket and withdrew a small manila envelope. "Before I go," he said, "there's something I think you should see." The gesture was so unexpected that conversations at 3 nearby tables stopped entirely. Clifton Arledge set down his fork and turned in his chair to get a better view of what was happening. Sloane moved closer, abandoning any pretense of continuing her duty. Harlan stared at the envelope with obvious confusion. "Sir, I'm not sure what this is about, but just take a look," the man said gently, offering the envelope with the same calm confidence he had maintained throughout their entire interaction. "I think it will help explain why I was hoping to spend some time here tonight." The dining room had fallen silent, but this time the quiet carried a different quality. It wasn't the momentary hush of people pausing to observe an awkward social situation. It was the breathless anticipation of an audience that sensed they were about to witness something remarkable. Harlan hesitated for several seconds before accepting the envelope, his mind racing through possibilities of what it might contain. Business cards, legal documents, some kind of complaint or compliment about the restaurant. None of the scenarios he could imagine seemed to warrant this level of mysterious presentation. As his fingers worked to open the envelope's sealed flap, every person within sight held their breath, waiting to discover what revelation would emerge from that small manila package and how it would change the trajectory of an evening that had already become far more interesting than anyone had anticipated. Harlan's fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as he worked to open the envelope's sealed flap. The entire dining room seemed suspended in a moment of collective anticipation, as if every patron, every server, every person within sight understood that they were about to witness something that would fundamentally alter the evening's trajectory. The envelope contained several folded documents, and as Harlan carefully extracted them, the crisp sound of unfolding paper seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed atmosphere. The first document appeared to be some kind of legal paperwork, dense with the small print and official seals that characterized important business transactions. Sloane Merrick found herself holding her breath as she watched Harlan's eyes scan the first page. She had never seen her normally unflappable manager look quite so uncertain, and the expression of growing confusion on his face only heightened the tension that had settled over the restaurant like a heavy blanket. "I don't understand," Harlan murmured, his voice barely audible as he flipped to the second page of the document. "This appears to be a bill of sale," the casually dressed man finished quietly. "Signed last Tuesday. The transaction was completed through Donnelly and Associates, with all the appropriate legal documentation filed with the city and state." Clifton Arledge, who had abandoned all pretense of eating his dinner, leaned forward in his chair to get a better view of the proceeding. In his 73 years, including a distinguished career in corporate law, he had witnessed many dramatic moments, but few had carried the electric tension that now filled Meridian's dining room. Harlan's face had gone pale as he continued reading. The documents were clearly legitimate. The letterhead, the legal language, the official seals all bore the unmistakable marks of authenticity. But the implications of what he was reading seemed impossible to process. "According to this," Harlan said slowly, his voice taking on a hollow quality, "Meridian's was sold to." He looked up at the man standing patiently before him, then back down at the documents, then up again to Travis Kelce. The name hit the dining room like a lightning bolt. Several patrons audibly gasped, and Sloane felt her knees go weak as recognition finally dawned on her. The familiar bearing, the confident posture, the calm assurance in the face of confrontation. Of course, Travis Kelce. How had she not recognized him immediately? "That's correct," Travis said, his voice maintaining the same gentle tone he had used throughout the entire interaction. "I'm Travis Kelce, and as of last Tuesday, I'm the new owner of Meridian." The silence that followed was so complete that the restaurant might have been empty. Even the kitchen staff, who had been watching through the service window, stood frozen with serving spoons and plates in their hands, their mouths agape at the revelation unfolding before them. Harlan stared at the documents in his hands as if they might spontaneously combust. But I wasn't informed of any sale." Management didn't notify me that there was even a potential buyer, let alone that the transaction had been completed. The previous owners wanted to keep the sale confidential until all the paperwork was finalized, Travis explained. They were concerned that news of the sale might create uncertainty among the staff or affect the restaurant's operations during the transition period. The plan was for Vera Donnelly, who handled the transaction, to meet with you and the senior staff tomorrow morning to discuss the change in ownership and what it would mean going forward. Travis gestured toward the documents in Harlan's hands. I wasn't planning to reveal myself tonight, but circumstances seemed to call for it. The understatement of that comment wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Circumstances had indeed called for it, considering that Harlan had been in the process of ejecting the restaurant's new owner for violating the dress code. I need to sit down, Harlan said weakly, and Travis immediately gestured toward an empty table near the window. Of course, this is a lot to process. As they moved toward the table, the other diners began to murmur among themselves, their voices carrying a mixture of amazement, amusement, and secondhand embarrassment for Harlan's predicament. Sloane quickly fetched 2 glasses of water and placed them on the table before retreating to a respectful distance, though she remained close enough to hear the conversation sure to follow. Clifton Arledge couldn't resist the opportunity to witness history in the making. He signaled to his server that he would be extending his stay and settled back in his chair to observe what promised to be one of the most fascinating conversations he had ever had the privilege to overhear. Travis took the seat across from Harlan, who was still studying the bill of sale as if hoping it might reveal some previously unnoticed indication that it was an elaborate hoax. Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know that your dedication to maintaining Meridian's standards is exactly why I wanted to purchase this restaurant. Harlan looked up, his expression a complex mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and cautious hope. I don't understand. I've been watching Meridians for several months, Travis continued, not just as a potential business investment, but as someone who appreciates what you've built here. The attention to detail, the commitment to excellence, the way you've created an atmosphere that makes people feel like they're part of something special. That's not easy to find. But Harlan's voice trailed off as the full weight of his actions began to settle on him. I just tried to throw you out of your own restaurant. Travis smiled for the first time since entering Meridian's, and the warmth of that expression seemed to ease some of the tension that had been building throughout the evening. You were doing your job. You were protecting the standards that make this place special. If anything, tonight has confirmed that I made the right decision in buying Meridian. The conversation at neighboring tables had resumed, but at a much more subdued level, and it was clear that everyone in the restaurant was straining to hear every word of the exchange between the mortified manager and his unexpectedly gracious new employer. Mr. Kelce, Harlan began, then stopped and shook his head. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how I should address you now. Travis is fine, came the immediate reply. I may own the restaurant, but you're still the one who runs it. At least, I hope you'll consider staying on. The relief that washed over Harlan's face was visible from across the room. You're not going to fire me for what happened tonight? Fire you? Travis looked genuinely surprised. Harlan, tonight proved that you care more about Meridian's reputation than about making exceptions for people who might have money or influence. That's exactly the kind of manager I want running my restaurant. Sloane felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as she watched the interaction unfold. She had worked in enough restaurants to know that new ownership usually meant uncertainty for existing staff, and she had seen managers fired for far less embarrassing mistakes than the one Harlan had just made. I have to ask, Harlan said, his voice still shaky but growing stronger. Why did you buy Meridians? You could invest in any restaurant, any business venture. Why, this one? Travis leaned back in his chair, his gaze moving around the dining room as if he were seeing it for the first time. Because places like this are disappearing. Restaurants where excellence isn't negotiable, where tradition matters, where people can come and feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. I didn't want to change Meridians. I wanted to preserve it. The sincerity in his voice resonated throughout the dining room, and several patrons found themselves nodding in agreement. This was exactly what Meridians meant to them. Not just a place to eat, but a sanctuary where certain values were maintained regardless of the chaos of the outside world. So, the dress code stays? Harlan asked, a tentative smile beginning to form on his face. The dress code absolutely stay, Travis confirmed, along with everything else that makes this place special. But what about tonight? You're not exactly dressed according to the code yourself. Travis laughed, and the sound seemed to release the last of the tension that had been holding the dining room in its grip. Well, I guess that means I'll need to go home and change before I can officially have dinner in my own restaurant. The laughter that followed Travis's comment seemed to break the spell that had held the entire dining room captive. Conversations resumed at a more normal volume, though it was clear that everyone present was still processing the extraordinary scene they had just witnessed. Several patrons discreetly pulled out their phones, presumably to share the story with friends and family who would never believe had just unfolded at Meridian. Harlan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that spoke to the emotional whiplash he had experienced over the past 20 minutes. Mr. Kelce, Travis, I need to apologize, not just for tonight, but for not recognizing you. I should have known. Why? Travis asked genuinely. You had no reason to expect me to walk through those doors tonight, and even if you had recognized me, you still would have been right to address the dress code. The standards you maintain here don't change based on who's wearing the casual clothes. Sloane Merrick approached the table hesitantly, carrying a small leather portfolio that contained the restaurant's wine list. Excuse me, she said softly, but would either of you gentlemen care for something to drink? Perhaps some wine to celebrate the occasion? Travis looked to Harlan, who was still clutching the bill of sale document. What do you think, Harlan? Would you join me for a drink? I'd love to hear more about how you've been running this. I think I could use something stronger than wine, Harlan admitted, and his honesty drew another warm laugh from Travis. Sloane, isn't it? Travis asked, reading the small name tag on her uniform. Could you bring us whatever Harlan usually drinks after a particularly challenging evening? Sloane nodded, though she was clearly struggling to maintain her professional composure. Of course, sir. Mr. Whitmore, your usual bourbon? Make it a double, Harlan said weakly. As Sloane departed to fulfill the drink order, Clifton Arledge finally succumbed to curiosity and approached their table. Gentlemen, I hope you'll forgive an old man's intrusion, but I couldn't help but witness what just transpired. Mr. Kelce, I'm Clifton Arledge, and I've been dining here every Tuesday for 8 years. I have to say, in all my years of business and law, I've rarely seen such a gracious response to what could have been an extremely awkward situation. Travis stood and extended his hand to the older gentleman. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Arledge. And thank you, but honestly, Harlan was just doing his job. If anything, I'm the one who created the awkward situation by showing up unannounced and underdressed. Clifton shook his head admiringly. Most people in your position would have made a scene, demanded special treatment, perhaps even used the situation to embarrass Mr. Whitmore publicly. Instead, you turned what could have been a humiliating moment into a demonstration of leadership and class. Mr. Arledge raises a good point, Harlan said, his voice gaining strength as he began to process the evening's events more clearly. I've managed difficult situations before, but I've never had someone respond the way you did tonight. Most people either get angry or try to use their status to intimidate me into making exceptions. Travis resumed his seat as Clifton returned to his table, though the older gentleman continued to listen with obvious interest. The truth is, Harlan, I was testing the waters a bit tonight. I wanted to see how the restaurant operated when the owner wasn't around, how the staff handled challenging situations, whether the standards I'd observed as a customer were maintained consistently. You were testing us? Harlan asked, his eyebrows rising. Not in a negative way, Travis quickly clarified. I was hoping to confirm that my investment was sound, that the culture and values I admired about Meridians were genuine and sustainable. Tonight proved that they are. Sloane returned with a silver tray bearing 2 crystal glasses, one containing a generous pour of amber bourbon for Harlan, the other holding what appeared to be a craft beer for Travis. I took the liberty of bringing you our local brewery selection, she explained to Travis. It seemed more approachable than our wine list. Travis accepted the beer with a grateful smile. Perfect choice. Thank you, Sloane. As they settled in with their drinks, the atmosphere around their table began to feel less like the aftermath of a crisis and more like a business meeting between colleagues. Other diners had largely returned to their own conversation, though occasional glances in their direction suggested that the story of the evening would be retold many times in the coming days. I have so many questions, Harlan said, taking a careful sip of his bourbon, about your plans for the restaurant, about the staff, about whether anything is going to change. The short answer is that very little will change, Travis replied. I bought Meridians because I believe in what you've built here. My role will be more as a supporter than as someone who comes in and overhauls everything. But surely you have some vision for improvements or changes? Travis considered the question carefully. I'd love to see us expand our community involvement, perhaps host some charity events, or support local causes. And there might be opportunities to upgrade some of the kitchen equipment or enhance the wine program. But any changes would be made in consultation with you and the senior staff. This is your restaurant to run, Harlan. I'm just honored to be able to help preserve it. The sincerity in Travis's voice was unmistakable, and Harlan felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The uncertainty that had plagued the restaurant industry in recent years, the constant worry about changing ownership, corporate buyouts that prioritized profits over quality, had been a constant source of stress. To learn that Meridian's new owner shared his commitment to excellence felt almost too good to be true. What about the other staff? Harlan asked. Will they be told about tonight? That's entirely up to you, Travis said. I'm happy to meet with everyone formally tomorrow when Vera Donnelly comes in to handle the official transition. Or, if you prefer, we can keep tonight's revelation between the people who witnessed it and handle the announcement in a more traditional way. Harlan glanced around the dining, noting that while the initial excitement had died down, there was still an electric energy in the air that suggested word of the evening's events would spread quickly regardless of any official announcement. I think the cat's out of the bag, he said with a rueful smile. Half of Kansas City's social elite was here. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know that Travis Kelce bought Meridian, and that I tried to throw him out on his first unofficial visit as owner. Is that a problem for you? Travis asked with genuine concern. Harlan thought for a moment, then surprised himself by laughing. You know what? I don't think it is. If anything, it might be good for business. People love a story, and this is certainly going to be one that gets told. The important thing, Travis said, raising his beer glass slightly, is that at the end of the story, Meridian's reputation for excellence remains intact, and based on what I witnessed tonight, I'm confident that it will. Harlan raised his bourbon glass to meet Travis's beer. To maintaining standard, he said. To maintaining standard, Travis agreed, and the gentle clink of their glasses seemed to mark not just the end of an extraordinary evening, but the beginning of a new chapter in Meridian's distinguished history. As they drank, both men were acutely aware that they had just participated in something that would become part of the restaurant's lore, a story that would be told and retold for years to come. But more importantly, they had discovered a mutual respect and shared vision that promised to serve Meridians well in the years ahead. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in Meridians gradually returned to its usual refined calm, though an undercurrent of excitement continued to pulse through the dining room. Word of Travis Kelce's ownership had spread from table to table in whispered conversation, and several longtime patrons had approached to congratulate both him and Harlan on what they unanimously agreed was the most entertaining dinner theater they had ever witnessed. Vera Donnelly, the public relations specialist who had orchestrated the sale, received an unexpected phone call at her home around 9:30 that evening. Travis had contacted her to explain the evening's development and to suggest that she might want to prepare for increased media in the coming days. I have to admit, Vera told Travis during their conversation, when I advised keeping the sale confidential until all the paperwork was complete, I never anticipated that you would end up revealing yourself as the owner because you were asked to leave for violating the dress code. This is either going to be a public relations nightmare or the best restaurant marketing story of the year. I'm hoping for the latter, Travis replied, watching as Harlan moved through the dining room with renewed confidence, checking on tables and ensuring that the evening's unusual event hadn't disrupted the quality of service that Meridian's patrons expected. The conversation between Travis and Harlan had continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from the restaurant's financial performance to Harlan's vision for potential improvement. What had started as damage control had evolved into one of the most productive business discussions either man had experienced in recent memory. I've been thinking about expanding our private dining option, Harlan explained, sketching out a rough floor plan on a cocktail napkin. There's that unused space on the second floor that could be converted into intimate dining rooms for special occasions or business meetings. Travis studied the rough sketch with genuine interest. That's exactly the kind of thinking I was hoping for. You know this business better than I ever will, and you understand what Meridian's customers want. Ideas like this are why I wanted you to stay on as manager. Sloan had been discreetly monitoring their table throughout the evening, ensuring their glasses remained filled and providing any assistance they needed without interrupting their conversation. She had never seen Harlan so animated about the restaurant's future, and it was clear that Travis's approach to ownership was energizing rather than threatening. "Mr. Kelce," she ventured during a brief pause in their discussion, "I hope you don't mind me saying so, but the staff is really excited about having someone who understands hospitality as the new owner. We've been worried about corporate chain or investors who might not appreciate what makes this place special." "Thank you, Sloan," Travis replied warmly. "And please, call me Travis. We're all part of the same team now." The comment seemed to capture the attention of nearby staff members, and word quickly spread through the restaurant that the new owner was not only approachable, but actively interested in maintaining the family-like atmosphere that had always characterized Meridian's workforce. Clifton Arledge, who had extended his usual Tuesday dinner into an unprecedented 3-hour stay, finally prepared to leave around 10 o'clock. As he passed Travis and Harlan's table, he paused to offer his final observations on the evening. "Gentlemen, I've been in business for over 50 years, and I've seen ownership changes destroy more good establishments than I care to count. What I witnessed tonight gives me tremendous confidence that Meridians will not only survive this transition, but thrive under your partner. Mr. Kelce, your humility and respect for existing excellence is remarkable. Mr. Whitmore, your unwavering commitment to standards, even when facing the unknown, demonstrates exactly the kind of integrity that makes great restaurants legendary." After Clifton's departure, Travis and Harlan found themselves among the last patrons in the dining room. The kitchen staff had finished their cleanup, and most of the servers had completed their closing duty, though several lingered to catch glimpses of the new owner and to gauge the mood following the evening's revelation. "There's something I need to ask you," Harlan said, as they prepared to conclude their impromptu business meeting. "When you were standing there listening to me lecture you about dress codes and restaurant standards, were you angry? Were you thinking about how you could fire me or make me pay for embarrassing you?" Travis considered the question seriously before answering. "Honestly, I was impressed. You weren't backing down because you thought I might be someone important. You weren't making exceptions because I seemed confident or well-spoken. You were protecting something you believed in, regardless of the potential consequences. That takes real character, Harlan. I have to admit, there was a moment when I thought I might have just ended my career in the most spectacular way possible," Harlan confessed with a laugh. 12 years of building my reputation at Meridian's, and I was going to be remembered as the manager who threw out Travis Kelce. Instead, you'll be remembered as the manager who proved that Meridian's standards apply to everyone, including the owner," Travis corrected. "That's not a career-ending moment. That's a career-defining moment." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Travis pulled out his phone and showed Harlan a text message he had received from his assistant earlier in the evening. "I had dinner plans with some business associates tonight at another restaurant. I canceled them to come here instead, partly because I wanted to see how Meridians operated on a typical Tuesday evening, and partly because I was craving the kind of atmosphere you've created here. And you got more atmosphere than you bargained for," Harlan said dryly. "I got exactly what I was hoping for," Travis replied. "I got to see that the culture and values I admired about this place are genuine and deeply ingrained. I got to meet the person responsible for maintaining those standards, and I got to start building a relationship with someone who's going to be crucial to Meridian's continued success." As they walked toward the exit together, both men were aware that they were leaving behind an empty restaurant that would reopen tomorrow as the same Meridians it had always been, but with a new story to tell and a new partnership to guide its future. "Travis," Harlan said as they reached the door, "thank you for handling tonight with such grace. A lot of people in your position would have used the situation to humiliate me or assert their authority. Instead, you turned what could have been my worst professional moment into something I'll always be proud of." Thank you for giving me confidence that I made the right investment, Travis replied, shaking Harlan's hand firmly. I'll see you tomorrow when Vera comes in to handle the official transition. And next time I come for dinner, you'll be dressed appropriately for the establishment, Harlan finished with a grin. Absolutely. Standards are standard, even for the owner. As they parted ways in the parking lot, both men carried with them the satisfaction of having navigated an unprecedented situation with mutual respect and shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight had established the foundation for a partnership built on common values and genuine appreciation for what made Meridians special. The next morning arrived with an energy that neither Travis nor Harlan could have anticipated. Word of the previous evening's events had spread through Kansas City's social and business networks with remarkable speed, and by 9 o'clock, Meridian's phone was ringing constantly with calls from local media outlets, longtime customers eager to confirm the story, and business associates curious about the new ownership. Harlan arrived at Meridian's an hour earlier than usual, partly to prepare for Vera Donnelly's scheduled meeting, and partly because he was genuinely excited about the future for the first time in months. The restaurant industry had been challenging in recent years, and the uncertainty about potential ownership changes had weighed heavily on his mind. Now, instead of worrying about corporate restructuring or cost-cutting measures, he found himself energized by the prospect of working with someone who shared his vision for excellence. Vera Donnelly arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, accompanied by a briefcase full of documents and a carefully prepared presentation about the transition process. She had expected to spend the morning explaining Travis Kelce's background and vision to a surprised and potentially skeptical management team. Instead, she found Harlan and Travis already deep in conversation about operational improvements and long-term strategic planning. I have to say, Vera began after Travis had filled her in on the previous evening's events. In 20 years of handling business acquisitions, I've never had a client reveal their ownership because they were asked to leave the establishment for violating the dress code. This is either going to require some serious damage control, or it's going to become the most talked-about restaurant sale in Kansas City history. I'm hoping for the latter, Travis said with a smile that suggested he was genuinely enjoying the attention the story was generating. Sloan arrived for her shift to find a small crowd of reporters gathered outside Meridian's front entrance, along with several regular customers who had apparently come by hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous new owner. The surreal nature of the situation wasn't lost on her. Yesterday, she had been serving water to a casually dressed customer who was being asked to leave, and today, that same person was the subject of a media frenzy. "This is incredible," she said to Harlan as she clocked in for her shift. "Channel 5 just asked me if I witnessed the confrontation last night. They wanted to interview me about what it was like to see Travis Kelce get asked to leave his own restaurant." Harlan shook his head in amazement. "I've been fielding calls all morning from people who want to know if the story is true. Apparently, social media is calling it the best example of 'you don't know who you're talking to' that anyone's ever seen." The formal staff meeting that Vera had planned became an impromptu celebration as word spread through the restaurant's employees that not only had ownership changed hands, but the new owner had already demonstrated his commitment to maintaining Meridian's culture and value. Travis spent nearly an hour answering questions from servers, kitchen staff, and support personnel, all of whom seemed genuinely relieved to learn that their jobs were secure and that the restaurant's standards would remain intact. "I want everyone to understand," Travis addressed the assembled staff, "that Meridian's success depends on each of you continuing to do exactly what you've been doing. My role isn't to come in and change everything, it's to support Harlan and all of you in maintaining the excellence that makes this place special." Marcus Chen, the head chef who had worked at Meridian's for 8 years, raised his hand tentatively. "Mr. Kelce, will there be any changes to our menu or our suppliers? We've built relationships with local farms and specialty vendors that are really important to our quality." "Audit, Marcus, those relationships are part of what makes Meridian's unique," Travis replied. "If anything, I'd like to explore ways to strengthen those connections and maybe find additional local partners who share our commitment to quality. The response drew nods of approval from throughout the room, and it was clear that Travis's approach was resonating with people who had been concerned about potential changes under new ownership. Clifton Arledge arrived for lunch earlier than his usual Tuesday schedule, bringing with him two business associates who were eager to hear the story directly from the people who had witnessed. As Harlan seated them at their preferred table, Clifton couldn't resist sharing his observations about the previous evening's events. In all my years of business, I've rarely seen such a masterful display of leadership under pressure, he told his companions. Mr. Kelce could have embarrassed Harlan publicly or demanded immediate special treatment. Instead, he turned a potentially humiliating situation into a demonstration of the values he wants his restaurant to embody. By mid-afternoon, the story had been picked up by several national sports and entertainment outlets, with headlines ranging from NFL star's humble response to restaurant rejection goes viral, to Travis Kelce shows class after being asked to leave his own restaurant. The consensus among commentators was that Travis's gracious handling of the situation had elevated what could have been an embarrassing incident into a powerful example of leadership and humility. Travis returned to Meridian's around 4 o'clock, this time dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that met even Harlan's exacting standards for appropriate dining attire. The transformation from the previous evening's casual appearance was striking, and several staff members commented on how different he looked in formal business wear. Much better, Harlan said approvingly, as Travis approached the host stand. Now you look like someone who belongs in Meridian's. I learned my lesson, Travis replied with a laugh. Though I have to admit, part of me enjoyed the challenge of seeing if I could charm my way past your dress code enforcement. Eeky! You didn't charm your way past anything, Harlan corrected. You proved that you belonged here through your character, not your clothes. The dress code still applies to everyone, including you. As the afternoon progressed, Travis and Harlan continued their discussions about the restaurant's future, covering topics ranging from staff development opportunities to potential partnerships with local charity. The energy and enthusiasm that had emerged from the previous evening's unexpected revelation continued to build, creating a sense of possibility that energized everyone involved with Meridian's operation. You know what strikes me most about yesterday? Harlan said, as they reviewed financial projections for the coming quarter. It wasn't just that you handled the situation well. It was that you genuinely seemed to enjoy being challenged about the standards. Most people would have been offended or irritated. I was impressed that you were willing to enforce those standards regardless of who you thought you were dealing with, Travis replied. That told me everything I needed to know about your integrity and your commitment to this place. Partib, as the dinner service began, and Meridian's dining room filled with its usual sophisticated clientele, both men took satisfaction in knowing that despite all the attention and excitement of the past 24 hours, the restaurant continued to operate with the same attention to detail and commitment to excellence that had always defined its character. The story of Travis Kelce being asked to leave his own restaurant would become part of Meridian's lore, told and retold by staff and customers for years to come. But more importantly, the incident had established the foundation for a partnership built on mutual respect, shared value, and an unwavering commitment to maintaining the standards that made Meridian's a truly special place. Sometimes, Travis reflected as he watched Harlan orchestrate the evening service with his usual precision and attention to detail, the most important lessons come from the people who are brave enough to hold you accountable to the standards you claim to value. Sometimes, Harlan replied, observing the smooth operation of a restaurant that had successfully navigated an ownership transition while maintaining its essential character, the best leaders are the ones who prove their worth by how they respond when those standards are applied to them. As the evening drew to a close and the last customers departed, both men knew they had witnessed something remarkable. Not just the viral story that would make headlines, but the beginning of a partnership that would ensure Meridian's continued excellence for years to come. The restaurant that had always prided itself on maintaining the highest standards had gained an owner who proved that those standards applied to everyone, regardless of their status or success.